Okay. Hello everybody, I'm Jim Deeming. Welcome back for week 5 of Fingerstyle Foundations. Hope you've been doing your homework and keeping up, and we'll have time for some questions and answers after we cover the new material today, so stay tuned for the question and answer part at the end. What I want to talk about today is adding something to your practice regimen. And this is not fingerstyle specific, although we're going to use it that way today. But I want to give you the hard sell for the merits and benefits and wonders of using a metronome. And before you turn your computer off and run away screaming, I want to let you know that metronomes are not just for beginners. Very often, experienced guitar players will use metronomes as a part of their rehearsal, as a part of their technique for learning new songs, and to iron out and solve problems or kinks in their playing. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that tonight. First, we're just going to get a basic introduction to how the metronome works and how you can use it, and then I'll give you some ideas for other things that it's useful for. If you don't have a metronome, no problem. There's a metronome in the toolbox here on Jamplay. There are free metronomes all over the web. What I'm going to be using today is actually an app on my phone. It's called Metronome Beats. It's a free one. I'm sure there's a bunch of them. So you're not, there's no excuse for not having and using a metronome. You can buy fancier ones if you like. Some of them electronic ones that have a built-in guitar tuner and a metronome and other bells and whistles that you might like. But it's that metronome that we're after today. And essentially all it is it's a clock, right? It's an audible sound that you can listen to that plays at a rhythm, at a tempo, a speed that you specify, and then whatever it is that you're working on the guitar, you play with the metronome. And I'm going to show you in detail how we'll do that with the fingerstyle things that we've been working on so far. The way we want to do this is we're going to start at what's probably going to feel like a painfully slow pace and go through a basic. We're going to do a pattern today, and it's a pattern that you already know. And I'm going to show you when and where, how fast to set the metronome, which beats to play to, and then show you how to use this in your practicing. So to get started, here's my banged up little Droid phone here, and it's got a dial on there for how fast to play. I want to warn you, some metronomes have the option, this one does not. Some metronomes have the option of either playing louder or a different tone on the one beat of every measure. So if we're playing 4/4 time and we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you might have the option of setting a different tone for that downbeat. That's fine if you have it. It's not critically important right now, but the reason that could be important is if you accidentally have your metronome set to 3/4 time and there's only 3 beats per measure, it's going to mess you up because the one beat's going to not happen where you expect it. So if you have that option, make sure that you're set for 4/4 time. And I'm going to recommend that we start at 60 beats per minute. And when I turn this on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I want those beats, the clicks of the metronome, are going to be what I play with my thumb. So if we were playing a G chord and I had that alternating, that G chord pattern that your thumb is doing, 4 beats, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to set the metronome up so that we're playing the thumb beats with the metronome. And then when we add the finger patterns, the fingers are going to come in between the metronome. Okay? So you can just listen to mine if you want, rather than getting yours out and confusing. If you want to play along with me, let's climb on that G chord and get your thumb going with that 60 beat per minute metronome. And it sounds like this. And then if you remember our pattern, one of our patterns, for the G chord, we added fingers 1 and 2 in between each thumb beat. So this is where you get your first test of whether your thumb is locked into the metronome, because when you add those fingers in between, you might have a tendency to jump the tracks. See if you can do this. Boy, that's slow, isn't it? This is good for you. It's good for me. If you want to work a little bit of last week's topic in, do your palm muting. And if you get messed up, leave your fingers out and just go back to the thumb. And you want to try to feel this as much as try to actually force the timing of it. And one way you can do that is to also tap your foot with those metronome beats. That tends to internalize, get you physically connected and feeling that beat. That'll help bring your thumb in line. Let's try those fingers again. 1 and 2. And now, the next test is switch to the C chord on the beat. Your thumb pattern changes. Remember, your root note is going to be on the 5th string now. Now we're going to go back to the G chord without missing a beat. Okay, and now you can do this through all of those chords and all of those patterns that you know. If you're really listening closely, you can feel that even for me, this feels really slow, and there's a tendency to want to rush it. So what I would want to do for myself is go through all those different chords, but spend a lot of time at this tempo, because I'm trying to get not only playing on time, what this is also teaching you is to have a nice even spacing in between each one of your thumb beats. When you tend to get to a part where you want to rush it a little bit, what you're doing is you're shortening the gap between your notes, and it starts throwing things off. And when you're playing without a metronome, we tend to accordion that up, right? That all builds up and we get way ahead of the beat. And so that's the idea here, even though 60 beats per minute is painfully slow. We'll speed up here in a minute. I want to talk a little bit more about why to do this. If you are aspiring to play in a band, or play accompanying a singer, or play with other musicians, it's pretty obvious that you need to be in time with them, and maybe you might need to even be the one who drives keeping the tempo good. You'll find that when you play with various different musicians, some are better at that than others, and if you're in a performance and somebody's rushing, if you can start getting a little louder and drive that beat, you're basically becoming the drummer, right? So for playing with other musicians or other singers, it's very important that you have a good internal clock. It's also important for learning new songs, learning new techniques, new fingerstyle patterns. If you make yourself learn it slow and then turn the speed up a little bit at a time, you'll find that you can play it faster, better later. But you got to do those repetitions up front. You got to do the slow ones first, okay? So let's, I'm going to do one more sample at 60, and then what I want you to hear, we'll stick with the G and C chord for a minute, and then I want you to hear the difference between 60 and, say, 70, and listen to how it changes it, okay? Here we go again. This is 60 on the G chord. Tap that foot. 1, 2, ready, go. Let's go to the C chord. Back to the G. Okay, that's 60 beats a minute. Now I'm going to punch this up to 70. Okay, now this is going to get a little bit more comfortable. This is just a little bit easier tempo to play at. Get that thumb going, get that foot tapping. And so on. You get the idea. Just to give you a sample then of where you could go later, you get it up to 80 and you do the same thing. Okay, now I'm going to slow back down and talk to you about another use for this. If you practice it the way I just did, you're already getting this. But what I want you to think about, you may have noticed when you're learning patterns, and even though I've been saying it 100 times every week, that downbeat, that root note of every chord, when you change chords, that downbeat with your thumb is really important to get. And if you're still feeling your way through this and learning these chord transitions, you might find that when you're changing, in this case, from the G to the C, your mind might be so preoccupied with making that change on both hands, right? We got to change chords, we got to change the thumb pattern. If you have to stop and think about that, you're going to get behind. So if you practice that with the metronome, it's going to turn the lights on and let you know whether or not you're keeping time on those changes. And to take that a step further, if you are struggling between, let's say, these two chords, turn that metronome down to slow and practice with that metronome and only work back and forth between those two chord changes. Okay, maybe you would do it like this, just 4 beats on each chord. Let's get our thumb going. So play a measure of G, and then a measure of C. Back and forth. It's going to let you know in a real big hurry whether your thumb is on track. Okay, work that through all of your chord transitions and all of your patterns, and work on that with your palm muting, and let that metronome be your guide. Now everybody wants to know, so how long should I do this at 60 beats a minute? It's not really a matter of how long so much as it is when can you play it solid, steady, and smooth and get through your chord transitions. And what I recommend is maybe you do what I just did. Start with G, C, and D. Those are the main chords for the key of G. Work through those 3, and then go to C, and and play your 3 chords in the key of C, which would be C, F, and G, and rotate through each of those chords at 60 beats a minute. When you start to get comfortable with that, then you can turn it up 10 beats at a time. I would do several, a few dozen maybe repetitions at each beat, because again, it's not a question of whether you can play it. We want your thumb to settle down and be smooth and comfortable at each one of those tempos. Okay, we're striving here for smoothness and being what people call in the pocket, which means that your thumb is chunking right in there with the metronome on each beat. And you've probably noticed by now that while I'm trying to do this on camera and talk to you and look at everything all at the same time, I'm still tending to rush it a little bit, and I'm not satisfied with how have been playing it so far, so I would stay here. For me, playing the slow stuff is actually just as challenging, if not more so, than the super fast stuff. Once you get going really fast, you can fake it and you can get away with sloughing things a little bit. When you're playing something that's really slow and articulate, that's when if you make a mistake or you flub the tempo, it's like yelling it through a metronome, because there's more space between the notes and more detail shows up. So this stuff is critically important. I'm going to stop here and see if anybody has any questions about what we're doing so far.
So far we just have one, so if you guys want to put up any more real quick, we'll try to get to them. Right now we have one and only 88 asking, when you go from G to C, are you keeping your pinky planted, ready for C chord?
I wonder if you saw me do something that I don't remember doing, because I don't need to do that for this chord transition, but it's perfectly comfortable to do so. Okay, what the question is here is, here's my G chord, and the pinky's sitting right there, and actually with that pattern that I started on, I'm not even playing that note anyway, right? My pattern had my fingers only playing on the second and third strings, so actually what my pinky's doing down there is kind of irrelevant, other than for me this is a visual thing. That's my G chord. I expect that all to be there and look like that, and it doesn't cost a whole lot of extra Wheaties for the pinky to stay there. And then the question was, do I keep it there when I transition to the C chord? Not necessarily on purpose. If I was in a song where that melody note is either immediate or is going to show up quickly, it can be a melody note, and actually that's not a bad sounding C chord either with that G on there. So you can either leave it up or not as an anchor. What you typically want to strive for in any chord transition is minimal amount of movement, right? So sure, if the pinky's already down there, I don't need to move it to play the C chord. So you could argue that it's less movement to just leave it there. And yeah, as an anchor, as you called it, it's a little bit of a stabilizer for the left hand. It's entirely optional, up to you. I think what you'll probably find later on as you play more is you'll start doing things like that, maybe without even realizing it, but you'll start to feel what I call economy of motion, right? The least amount of movement you can make with your left hand between chords and melody notes and stuff, the better. All right, so anchor is fine. Is that it? Okay. Well, so what can you do with this, with what we've learned so far? Definitely work your thumb to that beat. There is an option here, I guess, that some people like to do. Since we're really, really focused on the thumb, my recommendation is that you play the metronome beats with your thumb. When you're doing the fingerstyle patterns, though, it may give you a different perspective to have a metronome beat for everything your right hand does. So if we're playing this pattern at 60 beats a minute, and then I add fingers in between those, so that's 120 beats per minute. We could run this metronome up to 120 beats a minute and then play a thumb and a finger. Why is that so much faster? I did my math wrong. Pardon me. 6. Why is that? We have, wow, my screen is really sensitive here. So, da, da, one, da, 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 one, da, da. We wanted I can do this. You might want to go up to, that's what's wrong. Play one on every beat. I know what I'm saying. I was right. Good grief. Multiply by 2, Jim. Now the thumb is on every other tick. See what's happening there? A thumb note and a finger pick note on every beat. It's no faster than what we were doing before. Speed-wise, we just have twice as many ticks. When you're doing the super slow pace of that, it might be a little more reassuring to have more metronome beats to line up to. Still want you to think about that thumb though. That's really what we're trying to focus on, emphasize that's your downbeat. That's the one that's got the punch. Okay, but you can, if you want to double time it and play fingers with the metronome as well, you can. Okay, everybody's got this, right? All right, we're gonna give you your homework assignment then. I recommend doing this as often as you can make yourself do it, at least 2 times a week. As we're going through and adding more fingerstyle techniques to your tool bag, take at least a couple of your practice sessions after you've got the basic material down, and then get that metronome out and give it a crack at slow and then faster and faster speeds. And we're going to build on this. We're gonna use the metronome again in week 8. I'm going to show you some more tricks with it for learning to play songs or more difficult pieces, like maybe you got a fancy lick or a riff you're trying to learn. The metronome can help you break that down. But remember what I said, go back through any of the lessons up so far, do it with the metronome, and then when you find a spot, maybe it's a chord transition, maybe it's a particular pattern, if you find one thing that's giving you a bad time, isolate that, okay? Change back and forth between 2 chords if that's your problem. Or if it's just one pattern that's not smoothed out, stay on that chord, stay on that pattern, and just loop it over and over again with the metronome. And once you get the hang of it, I think you'll be impressed with how often using that technique can smooth things out for you and make it play better. All right. Questions about what we talked about or about the homework? No questions. We have stunned silence. I think you're going to find that I just unloaded more on you than you realize. When you go back by yourself and try this, you're going to find that it's a fair piece of work to get used to. Like I said, the metronome, when you're trying to play slow, it's really easy to rush it. Tom Emanuel calls the metronome the humilitron, because a lot of times we find out we had problems that we didn't know we had, and it's a little bit humbling or humiliating to play with one of these. But it is absolutely integral to playing well. And I can tell you for a fact that all of my guitar heroes, all of them, have told me personally that they still use it. Even as a solo player, there's one other comment I wanted to make. You know, when you're playing with a band, it's obvious that you need to be in time and to stay with everybody else. If you're a solo player, it's still just as important. And here's what my thought is on that. If you play a song that has a groove, right? It's got a certain feel to it. It's obviously got a tempo, but then it's got a certain feel to it. There's emphasized beats certain places. There's syncopated notes certain places. But when you start playing for somebody else, hopefully one of the first things they get is the groove, the feel of the song that you're playing for them. And it's almost like an unspoken contract that you have with your listener. They trust you to set the groove and play the groove. And if you're busy playing and then you get to a hard part of the song and you either speed up or slow down, whether you realize it or not, your listener absolutely is going to hear it, because maybe they're sitting over there tapping their foot. They're getting into it. And if you get to a hard part of the song and slow down, it is going to be very apparent to your audience that you've just slowed down, even if you're so busy playing that you don't hear it. So as a solo player, you want to get very good at checking and keeping the time throughout the entire song, throughout an entire arrangement. Look for those trouble spots. Almost every song that I've ever learned, I can find one spot in there that I'm really excited to play it because it's got a cool lick in it, right? So you get excited to play that part and you speed up. Or maybe it's really hard to play and you're really anxious for that part to be over. So you speed up for that part, right? Or if you got a big chord change, maybe you're changing from way down here to way up here, and that long flight up the fretboard, you're delaying the beat. You don't get there quick enough, maybe. Your rehearsal with your metronome will shed the light on problems like that and give you the opportunity to fix them, okay? And that is going to be all I have, unless you all have more questions. We're going to pick it up again next week and do more cool stuff. Last call for questions. Okay, we're done. Get your guitar and go get to work. Thanks for joining us. Oh, the tab. I can make a comment about the tab. The tab you've seen before for this week, it's basically the fingerstyle patterns that we worked on before. I gave you a sample chord and then a sample pattern. So this is not new tab to you, okay? This was just meant to be here's something you can try with the metronome. 60 beats a minute. Work through each one of those chords that has a different root note. Remember, some chords have a root note on the 6th string, so there's a thumb pattern for that. Some have a root note on the 5th string, so there's a different thumb pattern for that. And then the D chord starts on the 4th string. So be sure to incorporate all of your different thumb patterns in while you're working through this metronome exercise, okay? So that's what the tab is for this week. Okay, see y'all next week.